Hey, my dude. How are you doing?
What's up?
I was doing a chill late night stream, and my chat sent me a link about the stock buyback timing.
Oh
And this
yeah,
was
I
a point
said
that
every
you.
time I was gonna do debates from now on, my goal is to walk through the last debate and then graph out all
Immature.
the arguments so that I can see if I'm missing like pivots or whatever. Is basically my goal here. So I'm trying to find all the places that you pivoted on, and then I'll come back for a second debate, and then I'll push you on all the pivot points, and then we'll follow the arguments down and see where they wind up.
Well, here's the concern I have here.
Uh-huh.
Is the larger point I think you have kind of implicitly conceded, which was you said AOC was economically illiterate for opposing stock buybacks as if it was some sort of fringe opinion. And I think that I've well established that while there's a dispute in the economics profession about and I'm willing to grant that, like right-wing economists think that stock buybacks are good. People generally on the left think that they're bad. And there is different economic arguments being made by both sides, right? Would you concede that?
No, you already loaded
You
it too
wouldn't?
hard. That right wing economists think that. No, I'm not even gonna agree with that. It's way too emotionally loaded.
Okay. Some economists think one thing, some economists think, and it's a moment of research and dispute in the economics profession, and I won't attach any partisan labels,
Sure.
but just the point. So she's not economically illiterate, right? For supporting this point, like I
No,
even
these are
linked
non
you.
sequiturs. Whether or not
Wait,
AOC ultimately
what?
supports or doesn't support stock buybacks doesn't make the arguments that she uses for it or against them legitimate or illegitimate. If you want, we can go back and listen to AOC's statement, but our argument was mainly about stock buybacks, not whether or not AOC is economically illiterate. I
Well, the
think
reason why I wanted to talk to you about this specific point is so you're arguing what you're disputing is her rhetoric, the fact that she was using
I'm not disputing her rhetoric. I'm saying that she's using bad economic
pathos
arguments.
as opposed to a logos or
Nope,
whatever
she's
the fuck.
using bad logos. Here, if you want, actually, listen, we'll do this real quick. Okay, very specifically. She has a 2-minute video. We'll listen to this together. I'll write this down exactly, and we can follow it all in real time, okay? Give me 1 second. Let me open my...
So she's confronting a pharma executive. So before you get the video, she's confronting a pharma executive and saying, "Why are you spending so much on stock buybacks instead of R&D?"
Sure. So, okay, let's just write down her arguments, okay? I'll
So
write it down. Wait. I just have the video. I just want to listen to it so we get the exact words
sure.
out so there's no rephrasing, reframing, whatever, okay? So, okay, we've got AOC up right here. I'm going to start it as soon as you're ready to start it, okay? We can start at the same time.
Oh shit! Did you link it to me?
Yep, it's in Discord.
Okay. Hold on. Let me pull this up here. All right. I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Mr. Mitchell, are you familiar with stock buybacks?
I know what they are.
And what is a stock buyback?
It's when a company decides to purchase shares of its stock in order to drive up its stock price.
So between those roughly 10 years, $465 billion was spent on research and development. The amount that pharmaceuticals spent on that same time to buy their own stock for the sole purpose of driving up the price was $516 billion. So they spent more than their entire budget on research and development on a tactic to drive up their own stock price. Stock buybacks used to be illegal in this country. And once they were made legal, they were allowed. And one of the things is that when a company buys their own stock, it drives up the price of their stock. And something that's not talked about is that CEO pay is tied to stock price. So CEOs right now are not incentivized to invest in research and development. They're incentivized to raise their stock price. So, there's a lot of debate as to what can be structured, whether we can go single payer, whether we maintain our insurance system the way that it is, how you make it more competitive, whether you don't, et cetera. But I think one very clear thing that we can see, Mr. Chair, is that if we eliminated stock buybacks, we could reduce the cost outlays of insurance company or pharmaceutical companies by at least half when you compare just research and development and the stock buybacks alone. And again, I just want to thank each and every single one of you for sharing your stories today, because there is no reason for a drug as simple as insulin, which costs $21 in Canada for a 10 milliliter bottle, to cost the equivalent of a mortgage payment or sometimes 2 mortgage payments. And with that, I yield. Thank you. Mr.
Okay.
All right, so you're okay.
So, wait. Okay, so I wrote down some of the statements that she made here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, the first statement that she just made was that $465 billion was spent on R&D. The amount that pharma spent to buy their own stocks for the sole purpose of driving up the price was $516 billion. So these two numbers just don't really relate to one another. Like,
absolutely, they do.
But
the discretionary cash that they have on their balance sheet, and they could spend all that money on stock buybacks. Or
okay,
all that
I'm going to make a
R&D
couple of statements, and you can tell me if they're true or false. Okay, ready? Is it possible that a company could spend $400 billion on R&D and do $100 billion in stock buybacks, but still not be investing enough in R&D? Is that possible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep,
if you agree that that's possible, is it also possible that a company could squander $400 billion on I'm sorry, is it also possible that a company could spend, $100 billion on R&D, and there are just no drugs that it could bring to market right now, and then spend $900 billion on stock buybacks, and that could be possible? Is it possible that there's just nothing right now that is like advantageous for a company to invest in?
Just for the point of moving forward, I would say in a fantasy world where we are close to curing all human diseases, sure.
Okay, then we agree then. Then you agree that these two numbers have nothing to do with one another. It is entirely possible that there are positive NPV projects that a company could invest money into and still have a lot to spend on buybacks or have nothing to spend on buybacks. The only reason she gives these two numbers is because the second number is bigger than the first number. They have nothing to do with one another. Do you disagree with that, or do we need to talk about? Do you agree with this, or do we need to talk about this more?
I totally disagree, and I'll tell you why.
Okay, wait, no. I don't want to hear a broader narrative. This is super basic, okay?
This is super basic.
So you agree
this is
that
money on their balance sheet that could be used in R&D. You're asserting that they have found the economically optimal amount of buybacks and research in R&D, and that is, a pretty bold empirical claim on your part.
But the fact that they might not have found a good number to invest or whatever, even if that was true, that they're somehow irrational actors, okay? Even if that was true, these two numbers have nothing to do with one another.
Of course they're wait, are you asserting that we have rationality?
All of economics is based on the idea that
the assumption of rationality.
Yes.
And that's where the models make mistakes. Because
why did
recession wouldn't exist if there was rationality?
What do you mean? What do you think rationality means?
Okay, first of all, what I mean is optimal, rational decisions are with perfect information.
That's not what rationality means. No, that is not an assumption that
that's
any
what we
field.
Assume in
no,
our models.
No. You are just wrong. Okay. Here, if you want, I'll shoot you a paper and you can go read it. I was going to read through it with my audience tonight. I'll link it to your chat. They can go and read it, and you can go and read it. When an economist talks about a rational actor, they do not mean that people have perfect information.
Self-interest. You mean they're self-interested?
Sure. Yeah, that we assume that people are going to make optimal decisions based on the amount of information available. That doesn't always factor in things perfectly. People don't have perfect information, and it could also factor in social utility as well. So, for instance, one pair of shoes might be $50.
No, I see what you're saying.
Okay, cool. That's great. I'm glad that we agree on that. Okay, so all of economics is based on this idea. Even Marx, everybody is based on the idea that we are rational actors. That people aren't just going to waste a whole bunch of money for literally no reason. Because if we thought that, then literally all economic theory would fail. There is no, unless there's some weird absurdist or chaos theory economics or whatever.
No. This is fine. Like this point. I see.
Okay,
what you
that's
mean.
fine. Okay, cool. All right, just making sure. So assuming that we have rational actors here that are trying to maximize the amount of money that a company is making, we can assume that the only reason why they would throw money into stock buybacks, or actually, wait, that's getting ahead of us. All I'm trying to say is that these two numbers, okay, these two numbers have nothing to do with one another. So, for instance, pharmacies or pharmaceutical companies could have spent $10 billion on buybacks and $100 trillion on R&D, and it's still possible that they could have wasted money on buybacks. That's still possible.
By the way, can I make an aside point? The rational model, that isn't the only way we look at economics. There's whole fields of behavioral economics where people make irrational decisions based on cognitive problems that humans have with processing information. So you can assume rationality in models, but human beings and decision makers in particular do not follow the rational model.
I'm pretty sure that there's literally something from behavioral economics that's called rational choice theory that states that individuals rely on the information they have available to calculate what they assume to be the most, like the best achievable outcomes.
The error is in the calculation.
Of course, everybody acknowledges that. Everybody acknowledges that. Behavioral economics, literally researches this. Yes,
rationality,
of course.
right?
That's what a rational actor is. It doesn't mean perfect information. It doesn't mean God tier. What I'm saying, because this is a super dumb point that a lot of lefties make when they try to criticize economics, and I see it posted on a San subreddit, I see it posted on Chapo Trap House, and I saw it a lot in your chat last night, and I see it in your chat right now, is that people assume that when an economist says that some economic agent is rational, that they're saying, oh, they think that people have perfect information and never make a mistake. That is not true. That is absolutely not what economists think. It just means that we assume that people make what they interpret to be the most optimal outcome with the information they have available. Now, that might not even be the most optimal outcome, but it's what they think is the most optimal outcome. The alternative to this is thinking that people...
Subject to cognitive errors.
Sure, of course. Yes, absolutely. Which is what behavioral economist studies. What?
Like sunk cost fallacy. People make all sorts of mistakes.
Of course.
That are irrational when they make decisions. So
sure, but when you're saying irrational there, that's still a part of the rationality of a person. So, for instance, a person might rationally...
Rationally be irrational?
Yes, that is correct. Do you need me to explain that?
Okay.
I can explain that.
No, go on. This is good. Keep going.
Okay, so I'll explain that because that might sound confusing. How can a person rationally be irrational? So a person might sink some amount of money into a project, okay, and that amount of money that they've sunk into that project is going to weigh on them in some subjective way that when they have to choose where to invest future money, they're going to continue to sink it into that project because using
that would be economically irrational, though.
Well, it would be what you would expect a rational...
So you're telling me that human beings aren't economically rational because, for example, the sunk cost fallacy, where someone has invested a bunch of money in a project and they're not properly calculating whether the next dollar is a worthy investment. They're seeing all that lost money, which if they were economically rational, they would be able to coldly and dispassionately say, that money is lost, let's cut and run and spend on something else. But what we see in actual human behavior is they continue to spend money on the sunk cost.
Okay, I didn't want to write like an arg map for like everything we've talked about. Well, but you just conceded the definition to me, and now you're fighting the definition. So so I'm going to return back to the primary point. I'm going to ask you again, what do you think economists mean when they say a rational agent?
But here's the point.
No, don't pivot. Please don't pivot. You pivoted on every argument we made yesterday. Can you just answer this question? What do you think that economists mean when they...
No, I'll even grant you the idea that they're making rational, that economists describe...
Well, but the problem is you don't understand what a rational actor is right now. You think rational means you are making these cold, dispassionate calculations that are based on perfect information. That's not what a rational actor is.
Okay, tell me what you think rationality is.
Sure. Wait. Rationality, that's a different question than what somebody in economics considers to be a rational person, right? A rational person in an economic sense is just somebody that's spending their money in what they personally consider to be the best way possible. That's all a rational person is. So they might think,
I'll read a definition and you tell me if, and this is my understanding of when economists use the phrase rational behavior.
Okay.
I think we've established that humans don't behave in this way, but this is the way economists describe economic behavior. Mm-hmm. They say rational behavior refers to decision-making process that is based on making choices that result in the optimal level of benefit or utility for an individual.
Yes.
The assumption of rational behavior implies that people would rather be better off than worse off.
Yes.
Most conventional economic theories are based on the assumption that all individuals taking part in any action or activity are behaving rationally. Now, here's the problem with that.
Wait. I almost agree with your definition, but it's missing one word in there. Can reread that again, and I'll tell you the one word that's missing there.
Okay, for the whole thing?
Yeah, just start reading again. It's the early part.
This is reading with Mike from PA.
Yep, reading with Mike from PA. Okay, go ahead.
Rational behavior refers to a decision-making process that is based on making choices that result in the optimal level of benefit or utility for
Okay, wait. So it's before optimal, you just need the word perceived, and that's what that means. That's what economists think. It's what an individual perceives as the most optimal outcome for them. That isn't always going to align with reality.
And let's talk about what behavioral economics was that I brought up, and I said that behavioral economics studies the effect of psychological, cognitive, emotional, cultural, and social factors on the economic decisions of individuals and institutions, and how those decisions vary from those implied by classical theory, aka rational behavior. So there's behavioral economics is a evolution of and a contradiction of rational behavior theory that you're talking about. So basically, if people were perfect decision makers, they would do a thing. But we know that in reality, they don't do a thing because of this reason, this reason, this reason. And an example that we both agreed to exist was the sunk cost fallacy. So what I'm trying to say is, in the real world, these executives are operating under a behavioral economic model. They are not operating perfectly rationally. And they have misincentives. And this is something that I sent to you last night, which talked about how when a company is buying back a stock, what they're saying to the market
Wait. Before we get into all that, can we just focus on one point at a time?
But this point is related, right?
But every point you make is related so that we never have to actually solve any individual point. That's why I'm trying to make these argument maps, because we jump off of every point.
Wait. Do you think, okay, so let's focus on the point. Is the classical idea of rationality the same as the behavioral economics theory of
No, I don't believe that
economics?
any reasonable economist is going to say that like a rational agent, a rational economic agent is somebody that makes a cold, dispassionate calculation, right? That you would have to be an idiot to say this. People would never invest their money in stocks. We would never buy gold like conservative radio advertisements tell you to buy. We wouldn't waste money on junk food. Like we wouldn't waste money on like low APR cars with variable bullshit or whatever. Like obviously there's entire industries based on like casinos wouldn't exist, right? Like,
of course. But that supports my point, though, doesn't it?
No. Well, unless you literally believe that every economist is so stupid, they're like, oh, well, I don't even know how that works. It's impossible. We can't possibly account for how advertising can influence a person to buy a product because they're all rational agents. We're all at a loss.
If we lived in a world of perfect information and whatnot, that classical economics assumes, when they say that market rationality or the optimal price theory is correct, they would argue that advertising would have no effect, but we know that it has an effect.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Obviously, that whole industry is thriving for a reason.
And that's because imperfect information exists. You and I can't possibly know of all possible products.
Yeah, of course.
All possible choices.
But we don't need to know all possible choices to be considered rational agents. A person would assume that I'm going to spend my money in a way that's going to maximize my benefit. I might make the wrong decision.
Here's the question I have for you, Steve. Like you telling me that they're making the optimal decision with their R&D spending, and they're not spending $1 too little when they do the stock buyback.
Perceived optimal decision, but go ahead.
But that's carrying a lot of weight, because maybe they just don't know about a drug that's being researched.
If they don't know about it, then that's going to mean that was their perceived optimal spend. They were unaware of some drug they could have spent more money into.
Of course, but the same thing. They also have an uncertainty principle around the rate of return on a drug, right? They don't know with certainty whether or not a drug is going to pay out. They don't know whether or not a treatment is going to bear
of course.
fruit.
You don't know if it's going to pass all the trials for the medical. Yeah.
They make estimates based on each drug, right?
Okay.
And they guess. So even when they're guessing, there's marginal drugs, right? That you would agree are on the border of being profitable and not.
Yeah.
And so if we allow them, if we incentivize them to spend more on R&D, that would increase the number of marginal drugs that are invested in.
We don't know that. That's not necessarily true. It's possible that if you would have dumped that money into R&D, it would have been squandered. Maybe there weren't any good drugs that were ready to be brought to market. Maybe there wasn't any promising research on a drug that could have led to a profit for the company. Like these things are entirely possible. You haven't demonstrated that they're not, that there are all of these drugs that could have had all this money invested into them that these companies could have turned a profit on.
So I think what I'm hearing is that you believe that the National Institutes of Health funding level should be zero because drug companies are making the most optimal invest in drug R&D. And we don't need to support it because they're making rational decisions. So why the hell are we spending government money on it?
Because government research might be going to products or might be going to research that benefits the public good that doesn't necessarily bring a specific drug to market, right? The point of pharmaceutical companies that are privatized is that they can do further specialized research into some area to bring some drug to market.
No, it's to privatize the gains and socialize the losses, right? So that, in other words, the government is subsidizing research and development, and when a university or a public researcher comes up with a drug pathway to treat a disease, the pharmaceutical companies can come in, get the patent for that drug, develop it for the market, and then massively overcharge.
Okay, hold on.
American
I'm
consumers for
curious.
it.
Do you think that like if we were to just like that the government is just in the position to just spend all of the money that the private pharmaceutical companies do on drug research, that literally these companies just sprung up and are just like arbitraging the fuck out of us or something? Like they just came in and took over all the research and stole it from the government? You don't think that there's any value being added by a pharmaceutical company? Do you believe that?
I didn't say that.
Okay, hold on. You said you didn't say that, but the way that you just phrased that public R&D does everything, and they're actually the one, and then these privatized companies come in and they patent something and they steal it. Like, do you think
But
that?
you're
wait, hold on,
holding
wait. I want a yes or no answer to that, or you can elaborate. Do you think that privatized pharmaceutical companies add no value to the pharmaceutical market?
I didn't say that.
Okay, I'm asking you. So wait. So answer. I know you didn't say that.
calculate.
I just want you to answer that. I'm just curious. Do you think that?
But I did. You jumped over me. I said, yeah, sure.
Okay, so they do.
I'll be
Okay,
happy to
cool.
grant
So then
that
we
to you,
agree that they do.
some
So we
value.
agree that there is a value that privatized research does accomplish that public research doesn't. That's great. So there's room for both of them, which I 100% support. We should have broad research into pharmaceutical R&D and whatnot, and we should also have private companies that can take that research into a more specialized direction. A lot of it, by the way, which ends up as a dead end because a lot of these drugs don't make it through trials, and that's fine. There's room for both of these players in the market.
Yeah, and that was never our dispute.
Of course
This
it's
is
not.
like
Well,
the-
our dispute
this
was
is,
originally
what's the
whether or
point?
not the $516 billion that was spent on stock buybacks
but-
is relevant to the $465 billion
Well,
spent on
that's
R&D.
exactly the point. Here's the problem: is that you're arguing that they were economically rational when they made that, and that is a very difficult position to support for a number of reasons.
Okay,
we will get
why
to.
is it wrong? Tell me, do you know any drugs that should have had more money dumped into them that could have been profitable for these companies? Tell me what.
That
which
would require expertise in the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm sure we could find plenty of people to tell us that there are drugs that are
Okay,
not being
well, so
researched,
I'm going to
they're not being
assume then that
supported.
you've conceded this argument until you can think of a single
Well,
one.
no, but that's ridiculous. You're
No, because
demanding-
my model
you
makes
don't-
perfect sense, and everything makes
But
sense
it
in my.
doesn't make perfect sense.
My-
It doesn't make perfect sense. But let's keep going. Keep
Sure.
going.
Okay. So
Explain
the
to me
first
why you
point that
think
she brought up,
it's
she brought up 465 billion was spent on R&D, 516 billion was spent on stock buybacks. These two numbers have no relation to one another, and you really shouldn't be bringing these numbers up to try to say that money is being squandered on stock buybacks. It doesn't make sense. Okay. So that was my first argument against her economic, or I should say, finance literacy, I guess.
You keep saying they're not related, but you agree that they could divert money from one to the other. So they are related in the sense that they're the
So
discretionary
what you
spending
agreed on earlier was that you could have spent 700 billion on R&D and only 100 billion on stock buybacks, and you still could have squandered the money on stock buybacks. Or you could spend 600 billion on R&D and only 50 billion on stock buybacks, and the money could have actually been squandered on R&D. These numbers could be
But the
anything.
existence of those possibilities doesn't mean that the current possibility is correct.
No, what I'm saying is that because
And that's the problem that you have, is you're arguing that the current blend is the economically rational and optimal thing.
No.
And that stock buybacks have no impact on the level of R&D
what
spending.
I'm saying is that if two
Oh,
guys
wait, don't pivot, Steve. Answer the question. Answer the point I said, which was you're arguing that the current balance of stock buybacks to research and development is economically rational and optimal.
I don't know
and
what
that
you mean,
stock
but I still
buybacks
don't know if you know what rational means. So I don't know how to answer that question.
I read it to you multiple times.
Yeah, but I still don't think you know what it means. I think you mean that it means people have perfect information or something. Or
No. That this is the best possible thing for the company's benefit. Like
I don't know if anyone can know that. We would literally can only ask God. I think they're doing
how
what.
can they make decisions? How
Does a company make any decision? What do you mean? They make decisions based on their perceived best spend, right?
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay,
Then yes,
that's
I
what I'm
believe that
saying.
this was their perceived best spend. Yes.
That they believe that this is the perceived best spend
Correct.
to maximize profit.
That there were no NPV, there were no positive NPV
were-
projects, so they didn't invest
that there
money in
were-
them, and they did a stock buyback
No.
instead.
That the well, first of all, the idea that there are no NPV versus, I mean, there's probably positive NPV that is less than other investments, right? Like, say, for example, buying a treasury. They probably wouldn't invest in something that has an NPV, but it's lower than an alternative investment.
Okay, wouldn't that alternative investment just be another NPV?
Well, that's what I'm saying. But they're drug companies, and they're spending on non-drug investments.
I don't
And that
know
might be a
how
problem.
common it is that drug companies just spend their profits buying up other companies, if that's what you're saying, but like
Well, that's in fact one of the major pharmaceuticals, Valiant, that we talked about last night.
well, okay,
They
wait,
decided
I don't want to
spend-
jump into that. Okay, it's not relevant. Okay, it's not relevant to this conversation.
But it is relevant. You said you're not
Oh
sure, and
my
I'm giving you a point, which is they spent zero money on R&D, and they only spent money in M&A. And their argument was, we'll just be the hedge fund of pharmaceutical companies, and we'll only look for little drug companies out there doing research, and we'll buy them up, and we'll jack up the prices, and we'll make a lot of money. And it turned out to be a huge fucking scam. And they've collapsed horribly. And they've had one of the worst returns of all the drug companies.
Okay.
So that is relevant, right?
No.
Well, by
it's
the way,
not.
were they economically rational when they spent zero in R&D and Valent Pharmaceuticals?
It's possible. I don't know. I don't know the internal workings of that company. I would assume so, because I'd assume if the CEO was making really shit decisions, the board would fire him and they'd pick another CEO because the CEO would be fucking over their stocks.
Okay, so, all right. So you believe that we shouldn't in any way look at the consequences of decisions. We should only say if they were. Wait.
What do you mean by consequences of decision? What kind of consequences?
So this was they had an argument that the board, this CEO and this board had a belief that investing in R&D was waste of money. And they should only spend in acquisitions, marketing, and stock buybacks. Okay. Sort of what you are advocating for as economic.
I'm not advocating for it. I'm saying that's what I would expect a private firm to do. But go ahead.
So so they had that. That was a decisions they made, and they've lost billions of dollars of shareholder value.
Yeah, it sounds like they made a bad decision then, and they went broke because of it.
They made a really bad decision, but they were making an economically rational decision.
You don't know what rational acting means.
Yes, I do.
Holy shit.
What I'm saying is, you're saying the decision-making process.
No. So what you just said was because somebody made a bad decision, they weren't rational. That's just not true. You still don't understand what the rational actor means. You think that it means that they can only make good decisions. You don't understand.
No, that's not what I mean.
That's exactly what there's zero room for interpreting your statement as any other way. You're saying that because they made a decision that led to the company going bankrupt, that was economically rational. That you don't understand what it means. I don't know what else to say.
No. That's not what I'm saying. Okay. You're saying that they were making a decision that was the perceived optimal level of benefit. Mm-hmm. So
sounds like that perception was incorrect.
But from that point of view, Steve, any decision, because it's from the point of view of my subjective self, is rational.
Yes, the assumption is that...
Well, then what's the fucking point of calling it rational? Why don't we just call it subjective behavior?
Because the point of calling it rational is to show that we believe that people will spend in the ways that they consider optimal. So what it does is it means that we need to investigate how people view things in terms of what makes things optimal. Why would somebody buy a bowl of whatever food from Chipotle over another restaurant it has equivalent products, but it's $3 cheaper? There must be some other reason why they're doing it. Because we have to assume they're being rational. Because I guess in your world, people can just waste money for no reason, but a reasonable, like a behavioral economist might say, hey, there's a higher social utility attached to buying Chipotle, maybe because they are pollution offset.
Well, here's the thing. Like, you kept inserting perceived, and I read a definition from Investopedia.
Do I have any econ like grad students or whatever in chat to come and explain this? Because I'm gonna fucking kill myself if I have to do this. If I have any econ grad students, can you guys speak up, please? I can't.
Well, the reason why we can't move forward from this opinion is because you keep arguing that the money spent on buybacks is not related to the money spent on R&D, and I'm arguing that it's the same. It's a pool of money on the balance sheet, and they made a decision, and you're saying that whatever decision they make is their perceived rational decision. So so the decision isn't wrong, Mike from PA, because they're perceiving it as the best decision. And I'm saying, related to the consequences of those decisions, we can determine whether or not those were economically or rational from the point of view of a utilitarian perspective of the consequences of those decisions. Did they actually result in the correct, socially optimal level of drug research or not? And I'm saying it's very likely that we're below the socially optimal level of drug research.
Socially optimal has nothing to do with whatever we're talking about. It
doesn't when you're talking about the government and you're making policy. Now,
we're not talking about a government making policy. You're talking about
AOC. She's a fucking congresswoman making policy.
We're not talking about making a policy. We're talking about AOC making the statement that since pharma spent some amount of money on stock buybacks and less money on R&D, it therefore can be stated that their money was squandered. That is a non sequitur by definition, which showcases that she has a bad understanding of finance. That's my whole point on this statement. Because these two numbers could literally be anything. You already agreed to that. You said they could have spent $500 billion on R&D. And only 100.
And you would argue that you would say it was rational no matter what it was.
No, we're not talking about whether or not it's rational. What I'm saying is that just because a company...
What have we been talking about for the last 25 minutes?
Let me refocus you. Just because a company spends more money on R&D or more money on stock buybacks than on R&D doesn't mean that the money was squandered on stock buybacks. These two numbers are not related to one another. That's all I'm saying. That no person that knows what they're talking about would say, oh, well, they spent more on stock buybacks than R&D, therefore we know it's wrong. No, those two things are not related. They could have spent far less on buybacks than R&D, and they still could have squandered money. These numbers have nothing to do with one another. That's all I'm saying. This is undeniable.
Okay, And here's what I'm saying, which is also undeniable, that's the same pool of money, and those pharmaceutical industry could have spent that money on R&D. So in fact, they're making
if you want to make that argument,
they're making a decision between spending
if you want to make that argument, if you want to
decided that it's economically rational.
If you want to make that argument, then you need to find.
Hold on, let me finish.
Oh, I already know what you're saying. It doesn't matter.
I do. This is very simple. You're saying. What we're observing is that they said it was economically rational to spend more on stock buybacks than it is on R&D. And the question is, do you think that makes sense? And does that strike you as surprising that pharmaceutical companies whose sole their purpose in our economy is to create a profit by providing drugs to consumers, the fact that they spent more on stock buybacks than they did on their own product pipeline is surprising? And maybe it's the economically rational decision.
I don't know how any of that has anything to do with the fact that how much money they spent on stock buybacks versus R&D has nothing to do with whether or not the money was squandered. If you want to make that statement, then what you need to say is, here are some promising drugs that could have even been plus NPV projects for the company, but they didn't invest in them and they did stock buybacks anyway. That's the argument that you would go with. You would never just point to these two figures and say, since B is higher than A, it must have been wasted. That is a non sequitur and it doesn't make sense.
I didn't say it was wasted, but the question...
That's what AOC is just trying to make the point.
But we haven't gotten to the other points yet.
What I'm saying is that if she wanted to make this argument, the first point already doesn't matter. How much you spent on buybacks versus how much you spent on R&D has no bearing on whether or not there were more projects you could have invested in or more money you could have spent on buybacks. It is totally unrelated.
Closing parenthesis.
Okay, we're just going to keep going over the same point over and over again, because will you concede that it's a pool of money they could have used for more research and development, or they could have used it on dividends, or
they could have, sure, but if we want to say that they should have,
it's related in the sense that the money is fungible,
but it doesn't tell us whether or not money was squandered, which is what she is saying. That's because her next point is they spent more on their entire R&D budget on a tactic to drive up their own stock price. She's making it sound like the money is being wasted or squandered.
And that's a different point, and we can move to that point now if you want, or if you're too tired after this one point, it's fine. I understand. But we can move on.
Wait, hold on. Okay, wait, Calixtus, can you state your background and tell me what you want to talk about real quick?
All right, come on. Let's.
Oh, okay. I have an undergrad in.
Who gives a fuck?
Okay, go. Hit us up. What do you want to say?
Undergrads.
Wait, okay, hit him up real quick.
Give me at least a fucking master's.
Hit me up.
Fucking undergrads.
What we're talking about right now is high school econ 101, so this is plenty. Go, hit me up.
This is stuff we covered in high school economics.
I don't give a shit, because I'm talking about behavioral economics. Did you take that in high school, you stupid fuck? If not, get the hell out of here.
Okay. That's a bit unfair.
Okay, what is your point you want to make? Go.
When you talk about rationality in economics, you're not saying that something is the most optimal decision, as Destiny was saying.
That's not what I said!
That is what you said, like 12 times.
Oh my god, I read the rational behavior thing, and I said it was a decision the result in the optimal level of benefit or utility. The optimal level of benefit or utility is the fucking definition.
But that perception of utility is subjective. There is not like an objective, concrete way of measuring this. Utility is one of the most difficult to study concepts because it's so hard to tie a monetary value to social utility.
Let me give you an analogy. You say something's red, I say something's green. We look at it and we have a different subjective perspective. Now, are we both rational for saying it's red or green, or should we tie the color red and green to a certain wavelength of light? Is that rational based on the wavelength of light?
So what you just said,
on my subjective view.
So what you just said betrayed again that you do not understand what rational means. Here is a better analogy, okay? A better analogy would be a behavioral economist would ask, here are two equivalent shoes, okay? And every single measure they are exact same, except one of them was worn by Kanye West and the other one wasn't. A person is willing to spend $100 more on the shoes advertised by Kanye West than on the other shoe. Why? What is the perceived social utility there, right? Why? Now, we would assume that all people are being rational agents, that they're spending in their greatest perceived benefit, but the area of investigation would be, why would they spend more on the Kanye West shoes than the non-Kanye West shoes? These are the kinds of things we would investigate. Not like, how do we tie like a color to a wavelength? Like,
But
that's
here's
like
the thing. Here's the problem with your argument, and we're going to get to it later, is you're still understanding what I'm saying, is that the decision maker's rationality is for his personal benefit, not necessarily the interest of the company. Because you understand that the executive interest
tie their personal
is
benefit
different.
with the stock
Don't
price.
fucking interrupt. The executive's interest is because who the fuck are you? The executive's interest is different from the corporation who he serves as an agent.
But that's not true. That's why we have.
That is true.
That's
This
why
is
we
basic
have.
shit.
That's why we have stock incentives for CEO pay, is to make sure that those interests are aligned. Do you agree or disagree with that?
No, because of what we're going to get to later. I disagree with you that the interests of agents are perfectly aligned with their company.
Okay, I got you on that. I want to
That's
read the link that
ridiculous.
you sent me last night, okay? Give me 2 minutes, okay? Thank you so much, Nira, for that kind introduction. I've long admired all that you and everyone here at the Center for American Progress. So just to be clear, Mike sent me this last night and told me to read this, okay? I've long admired all that you and everyone here at the Center for American Progress do to promote a progressive economic agenda, and I share your commitment for making sure our markets are safe and efficient and fair for all Americans. So it's a real honor to be here with you today. I also want to thank my friend Andy Green, who in addition to being the Managing Director of Economic Policy here at CAP, has been a critical source of wisdom for me since my swearing at the Commission back in January. Before I begin, let me start with a standard disclaimer that the views I'm about to express are blah, 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 blah. Today, I'd like to share a few thoughts about corporate stock buybacks and some research produced by my staff that raises significant new questions about this activity. As Nira mentioned, I'm a recovering researcher. Before I was appointed to the SEC, I was a law professor who spent most of my time thinking about how to give corporate managers incentives to create sustainable long-term value. I'd often ask my students, are we making sure that executive pay gives managers reason to invest in the long-term development of their workforce and their communities? Or are we paying executives to pursue short-term stock price spikes rather than long-term growth? Little did I know that so soon into my tenure, I'd have a sobering case study to put these questions to the test. That's because of the Trump tax bill promising to bring overseas corporate cash home became law last December. Now, we all know the last time this happened, blah, 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 blah. When I first took this job, I worried that 14 years later, history repeated itself. Tax bill would cause managers.
Oh yeah, you blah 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 over the points that. AOC
Okay, I'll read it. I don't think it's relevant to what we're talking about, but I'll read it. Sure. Okay. Now we all know that what happened the last time a Republican-controlled government pushed through a corporate tax holiday in 2004. As that bill's sponsors hoped, American companies repatriated billions of dollars of overseas cash, but corporations didn't invest most of that money in innovation. They didn't invest in retraining their workforce or raising wages. Instead, executives largely used the influx of fresh funds for massive stock buybacks. So when I first took this job, I worried that 14 years later, history would repeat itself, and the tax bill would cause managers to focus on financial engineering rather than long-term value creation. Sure enough, in the first quarter of 2018 alone, American corporations bought back a record $178 billion in stock. On too many occasions, companies doing buybacks have failed to make the long-term investments in innovation on their workforce that our economy so badly needed, and because we at the SEC have not reviewed our rules governing stock buybacks in over a decade, I worry whether these rules can protect investors, workers, and communities from the torrent of corporate trading dominating today's markets. Even more disturbing, there is clear evidence that a substantial number of corporate executives today use buybacks as a chance to cash out the shares of the company they received as executive pay. We give stocks to corporate managers, ready? We give stock to corporate managers to convince them to create the kind of long-term value that benefits American companies and the workers and communities they serve. Instead, what we are seeing is that executives are using buybacks as a chance to cash out their compensation at investor expense. All I'm saying right here, and we can continue to read, is that the general case of tying corporate pay for the CEO to stocks is to line up their incentives with the board, which is something that you just disagreed with. Now, let me finish this article, okay? That you linked me, okay? Executives often claim that a buyback is the right long-term strategy for the company, and they're not always wrong, but if that's the case, they should want to hold the stock for the long run, not cash it out once a buyback is announced. Corporate managers believe that buybacks are best for the companies, its workers, and its communities. They should put their money where their mouth is. That's why I'm here today to call on my colleagues at the Commission to update our rules to limit executives from using stock buybacks to cash out from America's companies. And I am also calling for an open command period to re-examine our rules in this area to make sure they protect employees, investors, and communities given today's unprecedented volume of buybacks. Basic corporate finance theory tells us when a company announces a stock buyback, it is announcing to the world that it thinks the stock is cheap. That announcement and the firm's open market purchasing ability often causes the company's stock price to jump, so the SEC has adopted special rules to govern buybacks. Those rules, first adopted in 1982, provide companies with a safe harbor from securities fraud liability. The pricing and timing of buyback-related repurchases must meet certain conditions. After experience proved that buybacks could be used to take advantage of less informed investors, the SEC updated its rules in 2003, though researchers noted that several gaps still remained. In the meantime, the use of stock-based pay at American public companies has exploded. Although these pay programs present many challenges, the ones I've spent most of my career thinking about is how to make sure that corporate management has skin in the game. That is, how to keep top executives from cashing out stock they receive as compensation. You see, the theory behind paying executives in stock is to give them incentives to create long-term sustainable value. Because executives who receive shares...
Okay, hold on. We got to stop here for a second because I don't think you're comprehending what he's saying.
I comprehended everything that's been said so far.
What he's saying is that was the intention, but what we're seeing when we do the research is that they're cashing out.
Sure.
They're not.
So let's see what he suggests later.
There is a malinvestment between.
Sure.
There's a malinvestment. So currently, in reality of today, which is what AOC and I are talking about, as opposed to the fantasy world you're talking about, there is a misalignment between executive interests.
Sure. So
especially
I understand.
Buybacks.
So we can go back and make the clip. I don't feel like dumpstering you right now. We can go back and find the clips later. But the theory of what I was talking about. Sure. So the theory of what I was talking about, that the reason why CEOs are given stock compensation instead of pay is to align their interests with the shareholders. You disagreed with this several times. You are just factually incorrect.
That's not
now
what
you
I
can
disagree
argue.
with.
I don't care. I don't care what you said. You're just wrong. You can go back and clip it, and I'll pay you $10.
Hold on. You can't. You don't care what I said. I'm just wrong. I think that's the point of the whole debate is you're not listening to what I'm saying. You're just claiming I'm wrong because I'm wrong.
So earlier in our
what I said is stock-based compensation is intended to do that, but what
you never said that. You never said that. You never said that. You never said that. You said that stock buybacks were just bad. Okay, sure, you can say it now, but you're dramatically changing what you said yesterday. But sure.
First of all, he's not talking about stock. He's talking about the theory of giving stock-based compensation.
Sure. And we're going to read further in this article to see what his suggestions are. Hint, it's not eliminating stock buybacks. But go ahead.
Okay, are you ready? Are you going to listen?
Yeah.
Okay. So the point is, he's saying that theory has not held up because of the way corporate executives use stock buybacks to cash out of companies. So their interests are misaligned. They're leaning towards stock buybacks so they can get cash. They're cashing out of the interest in the company. So they're the ones making the decision to buy back, and they're making that decision for their own personal interest as opposed to the interest of the company. And that may cause a misalignment between the incentives of the executive and the incentives of what the company needs.
Okay, cool. So let's continue.
And he gave a bunch of examples of how it's happened in the past.
Sure. Okay.
Sure. So you're giving me the point that I'm 100% right.
I'm not giving you anything. I probably don't disagree with any of this. I don't think I ever would. That right now
you don't disagree with the debate, and you just conceded the whole fucking argument.
No, because this is the difference between like what lefties say versus like how actual policymakers work. Is you guys will identify something.
He's an actual commissioner of the SEC. He couldn't be more of a policymaker.
I know.
He's agreeing with me 100%.
Let's see if he does. Okay, let's continue to read. Okay. You see, the theory behind paying executives in stock is to give them incentives to create long-term sustainable value. Because executives who receive shares rather than cash demand higher levels of pay, the use of stock-based compensation has led to eye-opening pay packages for top executives. In the trade, investors and the economy as a whole tie executives' fortunes to the growth of the company. But that only works when executives are required to hold their stock over the long term. Researchers have long worried that executives who always prefer cash to stock, researchers have long worried that executives who always prefer cash to stock will try to sell rather than hold their shares, eliminating the incentives they were meant to produce. So it's no surprise that in the years leading up to the financial crisis, top executives at Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers personally cashed out $2.4 billion in stock before the firms collapsed. And it's no wonder that sophisticated investors have for decades...
Economically rational, by the way, chat.
And it's no wonder that sophisticated investors have, for decades, strictly limited executives' freedom to cash out their shares. In the wake of the financial crisis, Congress realized the importance of keeping executive skin in the game, so the Dodd-Frank Act included several provisions designed to give investors more information about whether and how managers cash out. Unfortunately,
as opposed to controlling
all know too well.
You now know when they're fucking you, chat. Congratulations.
Well, as investors, you can. As investors,
you're paying attention.
So as investors.
In your fucking mutual fund.
As
all
investors,
companies you invested.
Mike, can a board fire a CEO? Yes or no?
Of course.
If a board has more information that's leading to the CEO destroying the company, are they more likely to fire him? Yes or no?
Of course.
I rest my case. Unfortunately, as you all know too well, those rules have still not yet been completed, keeping investors in the dark about executives' incentives.
By the
Nearly
way,
8 years since.
This is just supporting me. If you think this is supporting you, you're losing.
Let's
your
continue
mind.
reading, Mike. Nearly 8 years since that landmark legislation, it is completely unacceptable that the SEC has still not promulgated these and other rules required by law. But it's not just that the regulations haven't been finalized, it's that the problems itself keeps getting worse. You see, the Trump tax bill has unleashed an unprecedented wave of buybacks, and I worry that lax SEC rules and corporate oversight are giving executives yet another chance to cash out at investor expense. How executives use buybacks to cash out.
Point. By
That's
the way,
why when I was
hold on, stop.
Go ahead.
Do you understand that the paragraph you just read is my exact point?
Not exactly, but we'll keep reading, okay? Because your exact point has been relentlessly. Now, I know you're going to backpedal the fuck out of it, especially when we get to this next section. But your entire point has been that stock buybacks are bad, period, and that they should use like dividends or something else. That's been your entire point. Now, once we read this, you're gonna double back and say, "Oh, well, no, if you change them, it'll be okay." And I expect that. So let's keep going.
Last
Okay.
night you said, Mike, if we structured stock buybacks in a way where we align the incentives better on my stream, you said this, and I said, sure. If in the fantasy world where we come up with perfect rules, I'm ambivalent about the way that companies return value to their investors. But in the world we live in now. And we talked about the principle of second best in economics and how you don't always have the perfect solution. You have the second best solution. So
okay, sure. Well, let's see what second best solutions this guy recommends because he's a policymaker. Remember you said
okay, that's fine.
Okay, cool. Okay. That's why when I was sworn in a few weeks after the Trump tax bill took effect, I asked my staff to take a look at how buybacks affect how much skin executives keep in the game. I was worried that lax corporate practices and SEC rules might lead to buybacks that give executives yet another chance to cash out at investor expense. So we dove into the data, studying 385 buybacks over the last 15 months. We matched those buybacks by hand to information on executive stock sales available in SEC filings. First, we found that a buyback announcement leads to a big jump in stock price in the 30 days after the announcement. We studied, firms enjoy abnormal returns of more than 2.5%. Now, I won't take issue with whether or not I don't know if this is good or bad. We'll just keep reading, okay?
So this is just an objective fact that he's describing reality.
Sure, of course. That's unsurprising.
Happened.
When a public company in the United States announces that it thinks its stock is cheap, investors will bid up its price. What did surprise us, however, was how commonplace it is for executives to use buybacks as a chance to cash out. In half of the buybacks we studied, at least one executive sold shares in the month following the buyback announcement. In fact, twice as many companies have insider selling on the 8 days after a buyback announcement as sell on the ordinary day.
So by the way, okay, let's stop here for a second.
Sure.
So let's link it back to a point he made earlier, and the point you made earlier, that when a company says they're buying back their stock, they're saying the stock is undervalued.
Okay.
And the person's making the decision, they're making a rational decision, right? And for the utility of the company, it's best. So they're so convinced the stock is undervalued that they're going to buy it back. But yet their personal behavior, right? They're selling while the company is buying. Doesn't
Mike,
that seem like a misalignment? Do not interrupt me in the middle of a fucking sentence. I did not come here to talk to you. I did not come here to talk to you. Shut the fuck up. I'm going to mute you.
Wait, really?
Okay.
Wait, what were you saying, Alexis? Wait, can you talk to me real quick? What were you saying?
Okay. All I was trying to say is that, yes, the company can think that their shares are undervalued, but a shareholder can go, actually, I want cash right now, even though it might be better.
You are literally the dumbest motherfucker I've ever heard. That's why you have an undergrad and not anything higher. Go back to studying, little boy.
Wait, what degrees do you have in economics or finance?
Do we want to do a credential debate?
Okay, like, that's what I thought. Okay, so slow down there, okay? Whoa, really slow down. Wait, what is your undergrad in?
Because my
is
in my Juris Doctorate, my specialization in education. I've tried to hold back credentials because I don't think they matter.
Okay.
For securities arbitration. Okay, so shut the fuck up. My credentials annihilate this dumb undergrad. By the way, idiot.
Okay, I don't know specifically what that is, but it's crazy to me that you have that level of education. You don't know what it means to be a rational agent in like basic econ theory.
Of course I do. Oh my god, I've read it.
Failed to misunderstand. If you knew that, you wouldn't have to wiki it to read it to me. That's what I do because I don't have a formal education. Okay. This is why I wiki things. You shouldn't have to.
We didn't have to waste our fucking time constantly arguing past each other. That's why I did it.
So let's continue to read. So let's continue to read. Okay.
No. I'm going to finish the point. Is the person making the decision that they're simultaneously making the decision that it's undervalued and that it's overvalued at the same time.
No.
Yes.
Is saying that they value the cash personally more than the stock.
Guys, let's talk about this.
There's utility to own cash.
Mike and the SEC commissioner or undergrad dipshit
Okay. you just
Wait,
have to
all
go
the
solve
SEC
the
commissioner,
ad-homs?
all the SEC commissioner is saying that that managers or CEOs tend to sell a lot of their
Let's keep
stock.
going. Let's keep reading. Let's keep reading because again, it'll support
Sure.
my
Okay.
point.
So all
This
he's
is
saying
so
is that
fucking
managers
pathetic.
or CEOs tend to sell their stock after a buyback is announced. I don't think that's that surprising. If you have a big announcement and the stock price is starting to go up, that you would sell. Maybe they just want cash. I mean, Jeff Bezos is cashing out a lot of his Amazon stocks. I don't think that's
Okay.
necessarily that surprising or that
Okay,
crazy.
And Jeff Bezos only sold his stock to invest in another enterprise, not for any other reason. Because
So?
he couldn't get bank loans for his stupid Blue Origin project.
Okay.
That's the only reason he's selling his stock.
Sure, but he's still selling his stock after what in order to.
He's
That's
not
fine.
selling it for cash. He's selling it to make another profitable investment. And this guy, by the way, what you're
I
talking
don't know.
about
Well,
here,
if he couldn't get loans for his investment, I don't think that means it's profitable. Because then, I think he just values it more.
Oh my
Okay, wait.
God.
let's continue reading. Let's continue reading. Okay. So right after the company tells the market that the stock is cheap, executives overwhelmingly decide to sell, and in the process, executives take a lot of cash off the table. On average, in the days before a buyback announcement, executives trade in relatively small amounts, less than 100,000 worth. But during the 8 days following a buyback announcement, executives on average sell more than 500,000 worth of stock each day, a fivefold increase. Thus, executives personally capture the benefit of the short-term price pop created by the buyback announcement. Now, let's be clear, this trading is not necessarily illegal, but it is troubling because it is yet another piece of evidence that executives are spending more time on short-term stock trading than long-term value creation. It's one thing for a corporate board and top executives to decide that a buyback is the right thing to do with the company's capital. It's another for them to use that decision as an opportunity to pocket some cash at the expense of the shareholders they have a duty to protect, the workers they employ, or the communities they serve. Sure. More importantly, policymakers, advocates, investors, and corporate boards have spent decades and billions of dollars of shareholder money trying to tie executive pay to long-term corporate performance. But the evidence shows that buybacks give executives an opportunity to take significant cash off the table, breaking the pay performance link. SEC rules do nothing to discourage executives from using buybacks in this way. It's time for that to change. The path forward. There are 2 steps we can and should take right away to address the practice of executives using buybacks as a chance to sell their shares. First, as I mentioned earlier, the SEC last revised its rules governing buybacks in 2003. Those rules give companies a so-called safe harbor from liability while pursuing buybacks, but there are no limits on boards and executives using the buybacks and the safe harbor as an opportunity to cash out. I cannot see why a safe harbor to the securities law should subsidize this behavior. Instead, SEC rules should encourage executives to keep their skin in the game for the long term. That's why our rules should be updated at a minimum to deny the safe harbor to companies that choose to allow executives to cash out during a buyback. And that's why today I'm also calling for an open comment period to re-examine our rules in this area to make sure they protect American companies, employees, and investors given today's unprecedented volumes of buybacks. So I think this is totally reasonable. You want to say, hey, there should be some month-long period or 2 months or 3 months where a CEO isn't allowed to sell stock immediately following a buyback. That's fine. I think that's totally cool. You've never suggested anything remotely similar to this. And this guy's not saying buybacks are bad. He's just saying that maybe this is one way that we could continue to align the shareholders with the CEO, which we do with stock compensation, which was my entire original theoretical point yesterday. And then secondly, he says, corporate boards and their counsel should pay closer attention to the implications of a buyback for the link between pay and performance. In particular, the company's compensation committee should be required to carefully review the degree to which the buyback will be used as a chance for executives to turn long-term performance incentives into cash. If executives will use the buyback to cash out, the committee should be required to approve that decision and disclose to investors the reason why is it in the company's long-term interest. It's hard to see why a company's buyback announcement shouldn't be accompanied by this kind of disclosure. I think that's super cool too. If you want to do a stock buyback, maybe you have to make it a extra disclosure to explain why exactly you should be doing it. Yeah, that's totally fine. I don't see a problem with that as well. Executives who can't sell their holdings in the short term, but instead have to create real value over time, have far fewer incentives to manage to quarterly earnings and pursue the kind of short-term thinking that dominates our economy today. The esteemed experts on our next panel will, I'm sure, offer broader policy proposals that can help us address these problems, but at the SEC, it's time for our rules to require corporate managers who say they want to manage for the long term to put their money where their mouth is. At the very least, our rules should stop giving executives incentives to use buybacks to cash out. So notice that both of his prescriptions here, he didn't say we need to get rid of stock buybacks or we need to ban stock buybacks. He actually reaffirmed everything I said yesterday, that the whole point of employee compensation in the form of stock is to incentivize the CEO to be aligned with the shareholder interest. And then here are a couple of policy proposals that he gives to continue to make sure that that alignment stays strong.
And what was the second point he made?
Secondly, corporate boards and their councils should pay closer attention
No. You skipped over it, and I'll correct you.
Sure.
And that is, he said that currently stocks are executive compensation in the form of equity is not doing that because they're allowed to use stock buybacks to cash out of the company, and their incentives are misaligned from the company, and we should have these rule changes. And by the way, he is a he is a commissioner, so he's making very prescribed and humble recommendations. And the people that he was on the board with, for example, like the idea of banning stock buybacks, I believe, is a Chuck Schumer policy. Unless you believe Chuck Schumer is some far lefty radical, the idea of reining this in is pretty mainstream. And
well, we're not talking about, what are you, reining in what? Wait, reining in what?
Reining in stock buybacks.
Well, he's not, wait, he's not talking about reining in or stopping stock buybacks.
Yes, he is.
No, he's not.
Saying he says the rules he offers are for that express purpose.
He says that the rules he's given is to make sure that CEOs don't have a safe harbor by which to sell, so they have to keep their stock a little bit longer, and that there should be like a special board that explains to investors, hey, a board that's ran by the shareholders, hey, this is why we're doing this stock buyback, just so you guys know. Neither of these have anything to do with getting rid of stock buybacks.
The problem I don't know how you could read this and miss this point. Is he's saying that executives use stock buybacks and the short-term pop it creates in the market to unload their shares.
Sure.
So they're personally incentivized to increase the number of stock buybacks that take place, probably to a higher than optimal level for the company.
That's possible. Now, this is part of, unfortunately haven't done this research yet. That was part of what I was doing.
He gave multiple citations.
Well, no, what he gave citations were that executives increased the sell of their shares after they announced a stock buyback. But we haven't looked at the long-term health of companies that have performed stock buybacks, because if the long-term health of these companies remains positive, then it doesn't really show that stock buybacks are harming companies. That's some research that I was still doing. I hadn't gotten to that part in our argument yet, though, when we started talking. But yeah, it does seem that CEOs do unload some stock after a buyback. Now, that might always be expected behavior, that if the stock price is going to jump, you'd expect to see them sell. I'm not 100% sure. That's still something I'm looking into. But both of his prescriptions here, neither of them had anything to do with limiting or stopping buybacks. All they had to do...
Did. No, limiting includes preventing the CEO from doing it and controlting when they could do it.
No, hold on. No. Neither of those had anything to do with getting rid of stock buybacks. The first thing...
I didn't say getting... He obviously didn't say get rid of it, because he is an SEC commissioner serving during the Trump administration, offering moderate proposals.
Are we just going with conspiracy theories here now? Like, he didn't propose it because he's somehow beholden to some other belief?
All right, I'm muting this dipshit. He could talk all he wants, but it doesn't matter. He's a fucking nobody. Do you want me to bring in 5 people and they could just talk? Like, he has no credentials.
If you want to bring in people with like actual like experience in this field, yeah, I'd love to talk to people.
Like, listen, if an economics PhD who can give me his CV comes in here, I'd be happy to listen to that guy. But this little dipshit, like, come on, dude, you don't need to 2v1 me. Like, be a man. Face me face to face. Don't have some...
Sure, so like, these aren't like ego trips for me. I just want to make sure I have a solid understanding of like the underlying like theory, but I mean, okay.
Saying, if an economics PhD wants to come in, that's fine.
Okay.
And by the way,
I don't think that anything we're studying right now, or anything that has to do with this, has anything to do with like I'm pretty sure everything like in an undergrad degree will cover these very basic finance topics.
But you can't seem to process what I'm saying, which is that there is a misalignment between the recommendation for a buyback and the company's interest.
I understand that is the potential, but that's not because stock buybacks are bad. That's because some of the rules that are governing them might need to be changed slightly. That's what the prescriptions here are. This guy doesn't say anything about getting rid of stock buybacks. All he's saying is that we need to make it so that CEOs can't sell maybe immediately following a buyback.
He's arguing a point that I'm making. First of all, did AOC even recommend banning it?
Yes.
That was the original point. If she recommended banning it, that's fine.
Yes, she did recommend banning it. So,
but this article,
we can jump off that, but we're still going through AOC.
That's fine. Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. I think that the evidence is strong that it's a good policy.
Eliminating stock buybacks?
Yeah, that there would be no adverse. You haven't established that keeping them serves any economic interest, really.
Everything this guy just said says that having stock compensation for your CEOs is a good thing.
The stock compensation is different than a buyback. What do you think a buyback is?
A buyback is when a company that has capital buys back shares of its own stock.
And what's stock compensation?
Is when you pay an employee with stock or stock options.
Okay, they're not the same thing. You can pay someone in stock options without having stock buybacks.
How does the company acquire the stock to pay their employees if they can't buy it back? Do they just make more?
They can issue shares.
Wouldn't that just dilute the stock?
Yes.
Yeah, but then they're just diluting the value of their shares, which is the
Do you
whole
understand
opposite
how
to
many
what
shares
you want.
are in a float of a Fortune 500 company?
Do you understand how many employees a Fortune 500 company has?
This is senior executives. This is not going to result in a actual significant dilution. Are you kidding me?
It doesn't matter if it results in a significant dilution.
You
already
just said it would. You said it would devalue. Do you not know what
Yeah,
the words that you're saying mean?
Okay,
Shut
so
the
it
fuck
might
up.
not devalue it to zero or whatever, or some significant amount, but if they have to print new shares each time they want to pay an employee more, like pay an employee in their shares, then they're gonna eventually reach a point where they have too many shares for their market cap or for
Holy
their
man, this is the dumbest
like.
person I've ever heard. All right, I'm
What is,
actually
how is
muting
this,
you now. So
how,
you can stay in here all you want, but it doesn't
how is
matter.
this
So,
controversial?
Destiny, is it your position that giving executives compensation through a dilution or by buying it on the open market is going to significantly change the stock price of a Fortune 500 company?
Maybe not significantly, but I don't think you would want your stock prices to be changed necessarily at all. I'm not sure.
Except when you're buying back the stock, right?
That's different.
What?
So buying back your stock is a form of returning capital to investors. Compensation for your employees is a cost of doing business. These are two fundamentally different things. They're not comparable at all.
Of course they're. Oh my God!
Compensating
you guys,
employees is a cost of doing business.
Please, let's get somebody who actually isn't an undergrad.
Sure. If you have any grad
Holy
students
fuck.
plus or whatever in econ that want to come in and talk, then yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay.
If you ever have any,
by
bring
the
them
way,
in.
so the point of this argument, the point of this was that, and this is established in the article that there's a misalignment between the executive's interest to unload shares during the offer of a stock buyback and the company itself. So they're saying from the perspective of the company, my stock is undervalued, but from the perspective of the executive, I'm going to cash in right now.
Sure. And he gave some suggestions to maybe further realign those interests.
And so what he's saying is currently those proposals do not take place, so that when a stock buyback currently occurs, we can be suspicious that the interests of the company and the interests of the executives may not be aligned. And in fact, that misalignment may result in the executives ordering excessive stock buybacks. And it wouldn't be economically rational from the point of view of the company.
So this has yet to be proven because I told you that I haven't done the research on this yet, that these are like actually negatively impacting companies. I still don't know if that's true. My understanding that is it is not, but I mean, obviously I would like to do some reading on this first to make sure. But that doesn't change the fact that none of the prescriptions that this guy you're giving, and this is the link that you sent me, so I know this is as much in your favor as possible. He is saying nothing about eliminating stock buybacks. He says that stock compensation for CEOs is a good thing, and we just need to make sure that a CEO is forced
Which has no relation to stock buybacks. And I never argued that paying officers and stock is necessarily
okay,
bad
but
for
this
the
guy
company.
is not suggesting getting rid of stock buybacks at all. The main conversation point that this guy is talking about is the problem with CEOs using stock buybacks to
The
loot
main
companies.
conversation point is agreeing with me 100%. And before we talked about this article, you disagreed with
What
the
is
concept.
what do you think I disagreed with before?
I said that there could be a misalignment between the interest of the officer, and feel free to go back through over this 10 times until it makes sense to you. There's a misalignment between the officer's interests and the recommendation to the company to buy back stock. So he might recommend buying back stock, even though it's not in the company's interest, because it personally makes him money. And that's a maladjustment, that's a malincentive that may cause him to recommend something that's not in the rational interest of the company. Does that make sense?
Sure, I don't think I'm not 100% sure if I disagree with anything. That still doesn't change the fact that this guy says nothing about getting rid of stock buybacks.
So you agree with the point. So you concede the point that I made, that you argued with me for like an hour about. You concede the point. But now you're moving the goalpost.
Wait, which point?
Saying, well, this guy doesn't recommend banning stock buybacks in this discussion, which supported your point that stock buybacks, as they're currently down, are there's a malincentive there that exists. And empirically, we can see that based upon this guy's evidence. And because he's recommending possible regulatory approaches to trying to line those things back up, does it support my point that you now concede?
Wait, hold on, I'm sorry.
So the point that we made and that you disagreed with originally was that the interests of the executive may not align with the interests of the company who he is making decisions for as an agent.
Okay,
Yes, this
wait.
is agency cost. This is like
Okay.
Wait. Okay, wait. So all I said. So here are my two original claims. One is that there's nothing wrong with the theory of stock buybacks. Okay, stock buybacks are fine. And two, that CEO compensation should be done with stocks. Those are the two things I said. Right. Now, if you want to say, are there ways that people could use stock buybacks in ways that are potentially negative or harmful? Sure, that might be demonstrated. I don't know. I still haven't done the research on it.
By the way, so you've just given up like the main empirical disagreement that we had.
Well, we haven't even moved to any empirical data yet. I'm just showing you that the SEC
yes,
guy.
we have. What do you think what example of when he looked at every single stock buyback and the behavior of executives on the announcement?
So all
that was
he
empirical
found,
data, which proved his point.
No, the empirical data.
That's that big spike. That's that big spike on that graph explaining. Look, they announced stock buybacks and they sell into the bump.
The empirical data that he announced, that he showed, was that executives sell more stock after a buyback is announced. But what we're really interested in is this damaging a company's long-term goals? That's the real interest, right? That's what we want to know.
And the apparent behavior is in conflict with that.
Well, maybe. I don't know. I have to look at the long-term health of companies that have executed buybacks. That would be the interesting thing to look at, right?
All right. And by the way, obviously it got a little bit heated when I have a dipshit.
Oh, yeah, wait. Also, wait, real quick. Just to go for all of this, you gave me this SEC announcement. The last thing, we don't have to go through all of AOC statements, I guess. One of the things that she said towards the end was, if we eliminated stock buybacks, we could reduce the cost outlays of insurance companies by half. That's a hilariously fucking stupid statement. Stock buybacks are executed with capital that the company has. And stock buybacks aren't considered like that's not like a cost of doing business. It's like returning money to your shareholders. Like
but do you understand when you do that you are reducing the balance sheet, right? That the company has.
Sure, but you could also
cash.
pay it back via dividends, and there's no guarantee that this money that
no, of course you could do dividends. You could do dividends.
Sure. So the idea that you would reduce cost outlays by getting rid of stock buybacks doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
That point doesn't make any sense. That's fine.
Okay, but it plays into the earlier point where she said 465 bill was spent on R&D, 516 bill was spent. She thinks that those two numbers are like all of that is just money they have and they're wasting half of it. So if we just got rid of stock buybacks, we'd save the other half. None of that makes sense. Totally doesn't make sense at all.
So the point is more subtle than that. We have established that there's a and you agreed with me. So you can't go back on this point because you've come towards me, and that is there may be a problem between the interests of the executives and their order and the decision of a company to invest in stock buybacks. And that may result in them spending marginally more or significantly more on stock buybacks that it's actually in the long-term interest of the company. And since we know that that is a possibility based on this article we read, we may realize that it wasn't economically rational, their level of R&D, because this the interest unalignment exists. So when you said it was economically rational and the perceived utility, you may be right. The rational position of the CEO or the executive who's selling into the stock buyback, yeah, he loves ordering more stock buybacks because he's making a ton of money. But the interest of the company he's supposed to be a fiduciary for may not actually be served.
Sure. So that's something that else that I wanted to look into.
Disagreement.
But that's something but you don't know those numbers either.
You've given it all up.
No, I don't know the answer to that. This is something but you haven't proven this either yet. This is what I wanted to look into the data to tonight. I wanted to see if companies that engaged in a lot of stock buyback activity actually suffered long-term losses compared to comparable companies. That's something I'm interested in. I don't think you know the answer to that either.
I think there's so many confounding issues going on.
That you can't know the answer? Why would you make a knowledge statement of something you can't know?
By the way, I didn't say you could know.
Then I want to know. That's what I want to look into. I'm sure there's been a lot of research in this area, and that's one of the things I wanted to look up.
Okay, we should look more into the research together. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that.
I'm good.
But the other point of like stock buybacks can harm a company's long-term health. That's an obvious point. You agree with that, right?
That a stock buyback can harm a company's long-term health?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. Only if the interests of the CEO and the company are so misaligned that it allows for that to happen, which is possible. But in theory, a stock buyback shouldn't harm the long-term health of a company.
It could.
It could,
because it's
but-
removing. Okay, so here's how. I'll explain how. I'll explain the micro foundation. So basically, you have $400 million on your balance sheet. You buy back your stock. Your stock rises in price in the short term, but in the long term, for various reasons, the stock declines. Maybe it's economic outlook. You were wrong when you said the stock was mispriced. There was some information that you didn't have when you made the decision. And so why it appeared rational when you made the decision, your perceived rationality, ended up not being the case in the real world. And the stock's value declines. So instead of having that $400 million on your balance sheet, that $400 million is gone. And so if you want to get that $400 million back, if there's a recession and you need that money back, right, your income comes down, you then would have to go to the capital markets and reissue stock to try to get that money back. So in other words, the money that you spent buying that stock back, in order to get the cash back on your balance sheet, you would have to issue a new share. You'd have to do a second issuance.
We could play this hypothetical in a million different angles, though. What if people are investing in a company? They've got 400 million. No, you're only hitting one side of the argument, dude.
But the point is
this
that
is so
saying,
disingenuous.
This is not disingenuous.
It's such a stupid. It's such a stupid.
I said, could a stock buyback harm a company? And I showed you how.
And I can show you how a stock buyback could how not doing a stock buyback could harm a company. Maybe a company is sitting with 400 million on its balance sheets. Maybe a company is sitting with 400 million on its balance sheets. It decides not to do a stock buyback. It just sits on all the cash.
The point is that it could, not that it's necessarily
it could hurt it or it could help it. Like literally every single economic transaction in the history, this statement is vacuous.
But I literally no, it's not vacuous.
It is.
You said that. From the research that you see, it may or may not harm it, and I'm saying that it could harm it. It could be,
or it could help it. Could you acknowledge that it could help it too?
Of course.
Then it's a vacuous statement. Everything could harm or help.
No,
what?
It's not vacuous because it's an important decision that's made by the board. And if the incentives, but here's the point. Let me make it clear. Let me make it clear to you, which I don't understand why you can't get this, but the point is, based on the research we just did, if the executives' interests are aligned differently than the company and they order a share buyback that's not in the interest of the company and it's their own personal pocketbook's interest, that could cause the company to receive hardship in the future. But do you see the point?
It could also, if you don't do a stock buyback, it could also. I'm acknowledging that it could be bad, but it could also be good. Maybe if they do a stock buyback, maybe it'll help them.
Be good. Well, I already.
So are you going to ban every single economic activity that could be bad for a company? Do you realize how fucking stupid this sounds, Mike? You're telling me that every single raising wages could harm a company in the future. Should we never raise wages? Investing in R&D could harm a company if the drug can't be brought to market. Should we ban every single R&D project because that could harm? Do you realize how fucking stupid this argument is? No, you're saying no. Shut the fuck up. You just talked for like 20 fucking minutes saying the dumbest shit in the world. You're saying
you're not understanding.
I am understanding it. Your argument is you're literally saying an activity that you're doing could harm a company in the future. No fucking shit. Literally every single argument that you ever could make could boil down to that anything could harm a company in the future. That's not an argument. Do you not understand that? That's not an argument.
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right. Let me go. I'm gonna finish researching the rest of the shit. There's nothing you can say to convince me. Also, wait. Real quick. My one question, please. Can you please DM me exactly what your PhD is in and what school you got it from? I'm very, very interested. And then you can finish your point. Go.
PhD. I didn't say that. No. Okay.
Okay, you're Juris Doctor. I'm sorry. I'm just real curious. What is your major and what school? I really want to know. You said it was in securities arbitration. From what school? I really want to know. I'm super curious.
Okay, dude, calm down.
Wait. Can you tell me?
Yes, I can, but I don't feel like doxing myself.
Okay, can you DM to me on Discord? Okay, right after this conversation. Okay, I'm not going to talk to you again until you DM me this because I'm super interested.
I don't care if you never talk to me.
Okay, all right.
Here's what you're not listening to.
Okay,
this is the unfortunate side.
Sure.
Is what I'm saying is the incentive to buy back the stock is malaligned right now.
It could be, yes.
Could harm. Okay, it is because we just looked.
You don't have the empirical data to show that.
What was the thing we just read? What did he say?
What we read was that managers sell stock after buybacks are announced.
Right.
What you need is to show me that companies are harmed by buybacks. That hasn't been demonstrated in what we just read.
GE
is one company.
So I established it then.
Nope.
No.
Okay, I need you. Hold on, really curious. Before our next conversation, I need you to tell me what your level of education is and what school you got it from. I don't believe that you have the credentials to have this conversation. I don't have them either. But like you've said statements that are so mind-numbingly fucking stupid.
Like
I
what?
can't
Like
believe.
what?
Like what you
what?
just
What did I
said
say?
was mind-numbingly fucking stupid.
Okay,
Because
but
you gave me
oh
one
my
example,
God.
you think that demonstrated some broader economic point. I can't believe you just said that.
that's
By the
not what
way,
I said.
did you know that I can
That's
point
not
to
what
one
I said.
company? I can point to one company that raised the minimum wage and
not-
they went out of business. Therefore, minimum wage is bad. I just demonstrated my point, didn't I?
No, that's not.
That's
not
exactly what
said.
you just said.
You asked me, did a company buy back stock?
No.
Give me an example.
No, that's not
Okay,
what I
then
asked.
misheard
No,
you.
that's
Then
not what I asked.
misheard
I'll
you.
restate what I asked. What I said was we have to see if companies that do stock buybacks have long-term losses compared to companies that don't. This means we would need a study on companies that engage in the behavior and companies that don't engage in the behavior that are comparable. We would have control companies for one or the other, and then we would analyze, do these companies do better or worse than companies that don't engage in buyback behavior?
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah,
But
saying
that would be-
GE did it and they lost doesn't prove anybody's point for anything.
Oh no, you said, oh, give an example of when it was bad, and I gave you an example.
Okay.
And if I
And you think,
misheard you, that's fine.
and actually, if we were to
And
go
by the
into
way,
GE, wait,
that's
if we
an
were to go into
anecdote.
GE, do you think that's why GE failed? Because they did stock buybacks?
I would say that losing billions of dollars of cash on the balance sheet may contribute to the bad financial position of the company.
Okay, I'm very curious on that. I'll add that to my stuff to read. I'm very curious if GE went bankrupt
See, and by
because
the way, this
because
is
they
why-
did
this is
stock
why-
buybacks.
By the way, this is why I didn't want to go into a whole credential thing with an undergrad econ guy, and I would happily give respect to an econ PhD because I don't have an economics degree. Okay. But an undergrad coming in here and telling me some basic shit you could read on Wikipedia is a waste of everyone's time. I
Okay.
want somebody who studies stock buybacks with their PhD thesis. I want somebody who is more credentialed than the both of us to come in here and talk about this topic.
Sure.
That would be
Okay.
interesting to me.
I'll
I
try to
think that
dig
would
into
be
my
a
I'll try to
chat.
dig into my audience to see who the most credentialed person I can find is, and you can try to dig into yours because I don't want you to accuse me of being biased. Okay. But I mean, like, it hurts to say you don't care about credentials and they don't matter, but then you like hand wave.
They don't matter.
Okay.
They really don't. But except if someone has a specialty in this area,
Okay.
that is important.
Okay.
And that's what I'm talking about.
So I need to
there
find somebody with a PhD, not just in econ, but they have to have a PhD in like stock buybacks. Like,
Well, I mean, I would be interested in what any econ PhD or any econ professor has to say about this,
Okay.
and whether because you just don't take seriously the point that there could be there could be a bad incentive between the stock buybacks. from the
it could
executive point of
could
view.
be. Yeah, it's possible it could be, but that's not why. But
So AOC's point could be right that they're spending too much on stock buybacks.
she
and not
didn't
enough on
prove
R&D.
it though.
But she could be right. Right? Like she could be right. So if she could be right,
What she said, the way that you would say this is, she's not even wrong. That's how I would describe her statement. She hasn't even made an argument that there's enough there for it to be wrong. That's how horribly stupid her statements are. And then her prescription at the end of getting rid of stock buybacks to reduce cost outlays of insurance companies by half is hilariously fucking stupid.
I mean, it's not a cost of actually running the company, so it's not technically a cost. It's a decision to do an owner withdrawal of equity from the company. You know, so that is not a cost. So you're right about that. She misspoke there. But I think this is a lot. I mean, you know, people who are recorded 24/7, they misspeak. It happens all the time. And the larger point of...
Isn't she literally reading from a piece of paper? She's not recorded 24/7. This was a statement that she gave to like some like congressional chamber or whatever. It's not like she was just talking off the cuff to a reporter. Like, I'm pretty sure she prepared this and she read this off of a piece of paper.
No, I mean, like, again, the larger point is being in opposition to stock buybacks or believing that they should be banned, as was the policy of the United States prior to the Reagan administration, is that an economically illiterate position? And I do not believe that it is.
Okay, all right. We'll
Plenty
go.
of-
Okay, we'll look into it
Like,
more.
that
Okay.
is fundamentally, don't you think that there are credentialed people in the field who believe that stock buybacks can cause malinvestment and problems?
Mike, people can believe that, but that doesn't mean that they are inherently right or wrong. It's how they justify that belief.
Are you still with me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, cool. And then we had a smaller conversation off stream yesterday, where you said that Trump making appointees to these committees can like totally fuck them all up or whatever. Do you still think that's true? That like his appointments like can totally fuck over like these committees and shit?
Oh, you talking about that it's important who the Secretary of Education is,
Yeah.
the head of the EPA, all those things.
Yeah,
those
that we
appointments
argued
are
about that
important.
yesterday. Yeah.
Yes, they're absolutely important.
Okay. Just for like the ultimate meme, this Commissioner Robert J. Jackson that you cited, this guy's a Trump appointee, by the way. I just thought that was.
I'm aware of that, but he comes from. But that's not a good point.
Okay,
Because
I just
the
wanted you to be
SEC
aware of that.
commissioners, like, but do you know that SE commissioners have to be appointed in a balanced fashion?
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, I was just aware, just making
Like-
sure you were aware of that. All right. Okay. I love you, Mike. We'll talk more later. Okay. Be careful.
I love you, buddy.
right.
And by the way, econ undergrad guy, keep studying, buddy. I love you. Keep it up. Stop reading Heritage Foundation. It's rotting your brain. Spend some time reading somebody who knows what they're talking about. All right. Thanks, bud. See you later.
Okay. All right. How you feeling, buddy?
I'm fine. I thought previously, like when I first message I sent to you was, I don't know how I'll go on a debate. I thought it'd be easy, but no, it's actually really hard, especially people in chat talking and all sorts of stuff happening.
Yeah.
I did get tripped up once. I was the one that sent you an email about criticizing people who bring up the prospect of like infinite growth under capitalism.
Oh yeah, I remember the
Remember
email.
that?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I ran it back after because I wrote it like off the cuff, and I read it back and I fucked up a little bit in it. But anyway, you got the idea because you said thanks. But anyway, yeah, that was.
Wait, what is
interesting.
a Juris Doctorate? What does that even mean? I don't actually know what that means.
I'm not sure, but I've.
Oh, so this is an
Jur-
undergrad. Wait, this is an undergrad. A Juris Doctorate degree is the highest law degree in the U.S. and is usually a replacement of the bachelor's. Or wait, is a Bachelor of Law, is that like post-bar exam? Is that like some law school? Is that so that you need like an undergrad and then you go to law school and get it, or?
I'm STEM brainlet. I don't know.
Okay,
I
so this
didn't
might be the
understand.
equivalent. So this would be the equivalent of like a master's, right? A Juris Doctor, a JD.
Yeah, I would have no clue. Sorry.
Okay, so he had a
the-
JD,
the-
a Juris Doctorate in securities arbitration, is what he said.
The Australian system is very different to the American system, so I'm not really sure how it correlate, like how they're equal,
JD is what
or
I'll look,
where
yeah.
they're equal.
Okay, sure. All right. Do you have any final parting words before I go back to my reading or whatever?
No, you can go back to reading. I did think it was funny that I was brought in for whether rationality was as he defined it or as you defined it, and then
We didn't talk about that at all, right?
didn't talk
Am I
about that at
generally
all,
like
it just-
correct that like when economists talk about like rational agents, they're assuming that like you're making choices that are optimizing for your benefit, but you might not have perfect information to be like a perfect like decision maker, right? That like a rational agent could still make what we would say are irrational decisions. So for instance, when somebody buys a pair of Nikes instead of making a better investment into like their retirement accounts, right?
Yeah, well,
Rails.
it's when we talk about economic decisions, we don't only consider like the monetary thing. We also consider like
Like social
externalities,
utility and yeah.
social utility. Like to say that you should always then you should always just live on like rice and beans and like lentils and like spend all your money into like I think it's 401k over there. It's called our superannuation here. And then like never do anything else with your money. Like obviously no.
Mhm.
Like there's value in doing other things. Like, anyway,
Okay. Also, there like economic theory doesn't rest on this idea that markets are like perfectly competitive with perfect information, right? Nobody honestly thinks this, right? I've never read this before in any.
no. Yeah, no one would say that like all economic activity is perfectly like maximized. Like if that was true, then why do like monopolies gaining like why do they continue to exist if it was
Sure.
possible?
Or why does
There's
arbitrage exist ever? Like it wouldn't even make sense.
Like, this
for,
doesn't make sense.
Sure.
If-
Okay. Sure.
Thank you for bringing me on. No, okay, goodbye.
Okay. All right. Damn. I read this last night after he sent it to me, and the prescriptions that this guy makes sounds pretty good. I'm still not 100% sure on if some of these things are bad, right? I would have to dig into We would have to dig into the like what happens to companies after buybacks are done. It could be bad. I'm not 100% sure, but the solution isn't getting rid of buybacks or not tying CEO pay to stocks. Like these are both pretty good things, but it would make sure that like the interests of like the CEO and the board is still aligned via stock compensation. And his path forward, the two suggestions that he gave was that was basically changing the way that execs are allowed to sell stock after a buyback is announced, and that corporate boards should pay closer attention to when stock buybacks are announced as well, to make sure that like a CEO isn't fucking investors over, right? Which I think is fine. I think these two prescriptions are probably fine. They seem okay. I have a quick question. Have you gone over the fact that qualified dividends are taxed at the long-term capital gains rate since Bush reforms in 2003, which essentially voids concerns that people might have about unequal taxation? A stock buyback merely offers flexibility on the time. Yeah, I understand that. I don't know if a qualified dividend just a dividend paid on a security you've held for at least a year? Is that what a qualified dividend means? I don't know what makes a dividend qualified. Okay, Jesus fuck.
It's because these share repurchase programs are usually short term. They benefit.